China is in economic trouble. The property market is stalling. Housing sales have collapsed. More ghost estates are coming to light, built with loans, taken from state-owned banks, that no one will pay back. So the banks are in trouble too. The economy is weakening, unemployment is rising, and the central bank is trying to save the Chinese currency. To make matters worse, the West is cutting off China from the latest technology. The Chinese have never had such an accumulation of problems. We will examine what exactly is happening in China, what has led to it, and how events in the world's second economy will affect the West as a whole. China's property sector is showing signs of weakness. The post-COVID-19 recovery has proved unsustainable. Demand and prices are falling, and developers are finding it increasingly difficult to repay debt. China's property sales have not stopped falling, with the average 30% below peak levels in 2020-2021, with a 60% drop for residential houses and apartments, says Goldman Sachs in its latest analysis. The bank also estimates that housing demand will weaken after peaking in 2017, when it reached 18 million units. In 2023, Goldman Sachs predicts it will fall to 11 million. Prices have fallen by several percent in some cities. Many developments are on hold, although authorities are pushing developers to complete at least pre-sold projects. Goldman Sachs expects a significant slowdown in construction activity between 2024 and 2025, when these projects will be completed. It is estimated that the construction sector accounts for around 18% of China's GDP, and together with suppliers such as cement, it already accounts for around 30% of GDP. The current situation in China's property market is extremely critical, and the scale of the problem is causing great concern among economists and investors. It is no longer just a matter of falling foreign trade or a weakening yuan currency. China's most serious challenge now lies in the property sector. The role of this sector cannot be overstated. The crisis in the industry has been going on for more than 2 years, but the Chinese government fears that its worsening could lead to a domino effect that will spread throughout the Chinese financial market and even global markets. The dramatic scale of the problem is illustrated by the figures. Figures from S&P Global Ratings show that new home sales by China's top 100 developers fell by around a third in June and July from a year earlier. Credit risk is rising, with the bank saying it is mainly borne by developers rather than buyers. One of China's largest developers, Country Garden, defaulted on 2 bond interest payments in August. 3/4 of developers' debt is held by banks, and their total debt has increased 23-fold between 2005 and 2020, Goldman Sachs said. According to the bank, developers' precarious debts amount to 15-20 trillion yuan, or $2.9 trillion. In July, Evergrande reported a total loss of 81 billion over the past 2 years as it struggled to complete projects and repay its suppliers and lenders. The collapse of Evergrande further complicates the situation in which it is the world's most indebted developer, having filed for bankruptcy protection in the US. The move has severely shaken investor confidence and heightened fears about the future of the sector. Now it has to ask for help, lest those who trusted it suddenly want their money back. This is the clearest argument that something really bad is happening to an industry that accounts for 30% of China's GDP. Evergrande's bankruptcy could have far-reaching consequences for the country's financial system and property market, says Andrew Lokenauth, a US financial markets commentator. Several other major property developers in China have recently defaulted, including Casia, Fantasia, and Shimao Group. Another Chinese property giant, Country Garden, has warned that it will consider various debt management measures. This signals that it too is starting to have problems. China's property situation is therefore not just a local problem, but has the potential to shake up the global financial system. Time will tell whether China will be able to find effective solutions to stop the crisis escalating and minimize its negative impact on its economy and the global financial market. The problems of China and its dependent territories are being highlighted from all sides, and it is worth noting that the opening up of the Chinese economy has raised high hopes in the broader market. After the end of the COVID-19 epidemic, the country decided not to rapidly stimulate its economy, which, let us recall, had been subject to severe restrictions for a relatively long time compared with other countries, which stifled internal demand despite the initial wave of euphoria. Today, the economy is feeling the effects of this phenomenon, exacerbated by recurring problems in the housing market and the growing risk of solvency problems for the main economic players, who have to cope with a situation of falling house prices and almost no demand for new loans. Youth unemployment is also a huge problem, approaching 50% if you count the economically inactive, i.e. young people who do not want to study or work. The People's Bank of China steps in. All these problems are also taking their toll on the yuan. The Chinese currency is at its lowest level in 16 years against the dollar. The People's Bank of China recently had to intervene in the market, reports Reuters. Is the twilight of China that Western pundits have been predicting for years finally here? China's demographic problems. With its rapid economic development and social progress, China is facing a new challenge, an aging and declining population. After decades of rapid population growth, China is now facing a demographic crisis that could result in a population decline of up to 1 billion people in the future. The United Nations has produced projections of China's population by the end of this century that show an inevitable decline. Changing the question from if to by how much shows the certainty of this trend. Lu Jiehua, a professor of population studies at Peking University, pointed out that the proportion of 15-59-year-olds in the total population of the People's Republic of China will fall from 70% in 2011 to just over 50% in 2050. This decline, which will affect the country's workforce and economic activity, is irreversible and cannot be offset by small-scale migration. China will face many challenges as its population ages, including strains on its healthcare and pension systems and a shrinking workforce. Time is of the essence. To minimize the negative impact of population decline, China needs to develop strategies now to promote sustainable demographic and social growth. According to Peter Zeihan, a well-known figure in the world of geopolitics, the situation looks very precarious. In an interview with Joe Rogan, Zeihan predicts that China's economy is on the brink of disaster due to skewed population statistics. Peter Zeihan argues that China's economy will last 10 years at most. A population decline of 100 million could be a key factor in a potential crisis. For example, if the actual number of people of working age is significantly lower than official statistics suggest, this means a lower labor supply. This in turn affects the country's ability to invest in development and maintain social support programs. Moreover, if the population ages faster than official figures suggest, the burden on the social security system will grow at an alarming rate. This is particularly dangerous in the context of China's one-child policy. These problems are complex and interconnected, meaning that solving them will require a huge effort and could lead to both internal and external destabilization. Zeihan stresses that these potential problems are not just China's problem. In an era of globalization, any instability in China will affect the entire global economic and political scene. China's aging population is not only a demographic issue but also a broad socio-economic challenge. At first glance, the impact of an aging population is most visible in the social security system. On the one hand, we have a growing number of retired people in need of financial support and medical care, and on the other, we have a declining number of people of working age able to meet these needs. The result is an increasing burden on the health and social care system, which calls into question its long-term sustainability. The situation is further exacerbated by the current rivalry between China and the US, particularly in the area of new technologies. US measures are undermining the Chinese position by making access to key technological developments more difficult. The embargo on the sale of chip design software, chip manufacturing equipment, or the export of finished components targets the very cutting-edge technologies that are essential to gain an edge in today's global world. This restriction not only affects China's ability to innovate, but also raises questions about the future of its technology sector. Individuals of Chinese descent who are US citizens or residents face restrictions on working for blacklisted companies, which can lead to the loss of jobs or even citizenship in a conflict of interest situation. The choice between maintaining citizenship and advancing a career is a difficult one for hundreds of U.S. managers. The U.S. restrictions apply not only to companies in the U.S., but also to those in allied countries, such as Taiwan's TSMC and ASML in the Netherlands. Any company using U.S. technology or products is subject to regulation. Every step in the manufacturing process that involves American involvement has consequences. As Henry Kissinger rightly pointed out, being America's enemy is dangerous, but being its friend can be just as risky. As possible compensation, the U.S. is proposing a Chip 4 agreement with allies such as Taiwan, Korea, and Japan to strengthen its technology sector and weaken China's influence. However, this move would not be without consequences, as it could lead to a further escalation of international tensions and complicate the already complicated relationship between China and the rest of the world. The current situation in China's property market and the rivalry with the U.S. in the field of new technologies pose two major challenges to the Chinese economy at the same time. It is not only the problematic economic climate, but also the complicated international relations that are undermining the foundations of the Chinese economy. China has been facing a wave of challenges for a long time. On the one hand, it is plagued by demographics, in particular, an aging population, which will put pressure on the healthcare and pension systems and a potentially shrinking workforce. On the other hand, the dire state of the housing market, which threatens to collapse. Second world economy is in danger of stagnating for many years, along the lines of Japan's lost decade of the 1990s. The impact on the world would probably be greater than the Japanese effect. Although it should not be forgotten that 30 years ago, Japan was the second largest economy after the US. Today, China is in second place. For the moment, China seems to be one of the main victims of the war in Ukraine. Its Great New Silk Road ran right through the areas now engulfed by war or Western sanctions. China has lost two assets in the eyes of the West because of the war unleashed by Russia. Its position as a reliable and dependable economic partner now looks like a tacit ally of Putin. And as a reliable supplier of goods to a rich Europe, sanctions are making trade difficult. China decided to use the geopolitical turmoil to put pressure on Taiwan, which provoked an allergic reaction from the US. As a result, the latest technology, including chip innovations, is no longer flowing to China. American companies that used to flock to China to set up factories are now looking for alternative locations. Vietnam and India are benefiting. China is losing out badly as a result of Western sanctions. Foreign investment is falling. The flow of new Western technology is stopped. Exports are falling sharply. And despite intensive efforts, the Chinese economy is not capable of producing chips with the same parameters as tiny Taiwan. The world's second economic power is clearly not laying down its arms. There is a lot of talk about Chinese colonization of Africa, about China's cooperation with Russia on raw materials, about seeking salvation in the creation of an alternative economic bloc. The BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, soon to be joined by other countries such as Saudi Arabia, and also try to persuade Arab countries to abandon dollar settlements in favor of the yuan. They have had some success, but there is still a long way to go. China's economy is particularly important for the whole world. If Peter Zeihan's predictions come true and China's economy collapses, the global repercussions could be felt on many levels. First, China is one of the world's biggest consumers of raw materials. Its demand for oil, metals, and other resources is crucial to the price of these commodities in global markets. If the Chinese economy starts to contract, the expected drop in demand for commodities could lead to a global price depression. As a result, commodity-dependent countries could suffer. Examples include Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. The second important issue is Chinese exports. Well, China is one of the world's largest exporters, and its products, from electronics to textiles, are widely distributed across global markets. If the country's production were to decline, This could lead to shortages in global supply chains. As a result, consumers would face higher prices, and other countries could experience an economic slowdown. The third dimension is Chinese overseas investment. China is known to be financing major infrastructure projects under the One Belt and One Road initiative. If the Chinese economy collapses, this investment could be reduced or stopped, which would affect the economies of many countries, especially developing ones. Finally, there is the global financial system. China has huge foreign exchange reserves and is one of the largest holders of US debt. In a crisis scenario, China could start selling its assets en masse, with significant consequences for global financial markets. Overall, a slowdown or collapse of the Chinese economy would challenge the global economy, affecting commodity prices and supply chains. It would also have implications for foreign investment and global financial stability. This is a situation that no country can take lightly. In the event of global sanctions or restrictions on China, one could expect a tightening of international relations and a new dynamic in alliance arrangements. The implications for the United States of a collapse of the Chinese economy are complex and multidimensional, and it is a challenge that requires a balanced and well-considered response on the international stage. It is equally important to recognize that an economic downturn in China, caused by both demographic challenges and poor policy choices, could be a destabilizing factor for many other countries. If Zihan is right, the collapse of the Chinese economy will not be just an internal Chinese problem, but a crisis of global proportions. In conclusion, the turmoil in the Chinese economy, caused by both demographic problems and bad policy choices, could have far-reaching consequences. The situation demands urgent attention from both Chinese policymakers and the international community. In the face of globalization, the destabilization of a major player on the world stage will affect everyone. Demographics, the real estate crisis, and the high-tech rivalry with the US all pose formidable challenges that could affect the stability of the Chinese and global economies. Although China has achieved impressive economic growth in recent decades, its economy now appears to be on a bumpy road, requiring comprehensive and decisive action to avoid a potential crisis with global consequences. On the other hand, the Western world will certainly benefit in the long run from a weakening China. First, the United States will lose a major rival on the international stage. Second, new emerging economic powers will benefit from a weakening China, from the fact that there is a long queue to take over China's role as a producer for rich Western markets. In fact, this is already happening, with Western companies already shifting production to countries such as Mexico, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, and India. In such a scenario, the biggest loser could be Germany, for which the Chinese market has long been one of the major main markets. And this will also spell trouble for the entire European continent, which is closely linked to Germany economically and politically. Thank you for watching the video. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. See you next video.